for me. Thank you. So a very warm welcome to you here in Alef Trust's Transforming Organizations Hub. My name is Jessica Bockler. I'm one of the co-founding directors of the Alef Trust, one of the hosts of the Hub. And today I'm incredibly pleased to welcome Dasha Suissa to this webinar. Dasha is a friend, an old friend, a member of our Alef Trust alumni community, a psychologist, and a very experienced individual who's worked in business for several decades, having worked in the corporate world as chief people officer and as a member of executive teams and boards in various organizations. Dasha has experience over 20 years of working in the field, as it were, and has immersed herself also in psychology and transpersonal psychology, and has recently published a book. And congratulations to you, Dasha, on that, on the launch of the book, Culture Detox, How to Break the Toxic Cycle and Build a Better Workplace and Start the Change. And this topic feels so vital in our world today, because we're finding ourselves in a precarious situation in regards to where we're at in the world today. There are many crises, and I'm sure we're all more or less aware of these pressure points, and we're all experiencing them differently. And the corporate world has a big role to play in the transition that really needs to happen. So this feels like a really important conversation to have, and it's a great pleasure to welcome you here, Dasha, to explore with us how we can detox in the workplace, what it is that we can do, or maybe what it is that we need to do less of. So with all that said, a big welcome to you, and over to you.
Thank you, Jessica, and good evening, good afternoon, good morning. I don't know where everybody is connecting from. Thank you, Jessica, for such a warm opening. I really appreciate it, and thank you also for the opportunity, to be here with you today and explore what feels like a little bit of an uncomfortable topic, I have to admit. And of course, I'm very curious about who's in the room and what questions you're wrestling with. But first, listening to your introduction, I feel like I have to acknowledge something, because every time I hear my background or mentioned, I have to say that I don't only connect or notice a sense of care for what I've tried to build, but I also always notice a kind of, I guess it's a ripple of discomfort moving through me, because every time this gets mentioned, I guess I'm also picking up on particularly how HR is perceived in general, not just for its good intentions, but also for how it actually operates in practice. And to be honest, I think while HR is often positioned as a driver of transformation, I also think that what's perhaps less acknowledged, particularly in the HR community itself, is like how deeply entangled the role can be in sustaining the very dynamics it tries to shift. And that said, it's of course uncomfortable to admit, but I also think that's exactly why it matters, because becoming aware of this entanglement for me, it helped me see how systems reward and punish as well certain behaviors, and how they can pull us into unconscious patterns of sometimes becoming gatekeepers of the status quo, or gatekeepers who protect the system over its people. But this entanglement also made me realize that if I'm entangled, it also means that I'm part of the system. And if I'm part of the system, it means that I basically, whatever I do within the system, it has an impact. So over time, I started to realize that maybe this entanglement also means that I can get more intentional about the choices I make, more intentional about what I feed in the system, so to say. So yeah, that's what I've been experimenting with for a while now. And that's also what brought me here, because paradoxically, this deepened my interest in workplace toxicity, because what I've seen is that whenever I make a choice to show up differently in the system, even the most subtle changes can sometimes ripple into bigger shifts. So yeah, so that's what I'm here to share with you today, some lessons learned, not just the graceful parts of my journey, but also the more difficult and the more humbling, but also maybe transformational parts of the journey. And yeah, and hopefully we'll have a conversation about that together. So with that said, yeah, I acknowledge that that was a long acknowledgement, but I felt like I needed to say this if I was to enter the space meaningfully. So with that said, I'm now really curious. I've now shared what drew me to workplace toxicity. So I'm now really curious about who's in the room and what questions you're wrestling with, and what made you curious enough to show up and to join us today. And I'm trying to catch up with the with the chat as well. So feel free to share anything in the chat or simply just unmute yourselves.
Yeah, we're getting some lovely responses there, mentioning locations. Do feel free to post about your interests in this field and the work that you're doing in this area. I can see here, Tim says, I'm working in local government and have an interest how organizations can transform themselves. And you're also with the Alef Trust. Hello, Tim. Yeah. Yes, do feel free to post there. And do feel free also to raise your hand and let us know if you'd like to speak. I can see people are typing.
Let's give it a few more moments. Yes, I see somebody raising a hand.
Hi. Yeah, I've been typing all day and just can't can't do it anymore. So I just wanted to say I was interested in this call because I'm actually on the second day of my internship with an organization that does, from what I get from their title, similar work. They're called NGL, which is Nonviolent Global Liberation. So we're working at looking at what the systemic change of and the systemic kind of soil that creates the violence, and also how do we work through them and how do we work collaboratively. So I'm interested to see your perspective.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing. Really appreciate that. Anyone else wanting to share? And unmute.
Hello.
Hello.
Good evening, everybody. I didn't come to this session with a particular question, but now hearing what you've said, something does occur to me. And I've never worked in HR, so there's my first. But I've worked with HR many times on agile and digital transformations. And what struck me about that experience, if I speak in the context of what you've just said, is how HR was an organizing influence, but somehow kept itself apart. And just for an example of the complexities or the incongruencies that created, I've worked with teams and teams of teams where we couldn't even manage to get HR to seriously change their performance systems such that they stopped measuring individuals, because it was team performance and it was systemic performance. And what I'm pointing to is that yeah, I've often seen a sort of cognitive dissonance or incongruency with the sort of approaches HR want to take and the actual known realities of performance and organizational innovation.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing. It sounds like you've experienced HR as being a little bit of a bottleneck, or is it just my interpretation?
It's not bottleneck as such, but it's more a case of sustaining the sort of machine-like paradigms
Right.
and hierarchical structures,
Mm.
because in a sense, you see, when we have change, we automatically, as you know, hit up against the status quo, the power structures, the value networks. And what I've always experienced is HR could never step out of those power structures and value networks to create the change that would be real change. And the example I've given you is just one of them. Stop stack ranking and individually meriting people, when in fact we achieve nothing as individuals.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the clarification. It's now clearer to me. Thank you.
Just mirroring there a little what Ray has said. It was picked up by Tim, who says he has had very similar experiences in digital transformation with HR. And then Jana added that she worked in an investment bank and encountered a very toxic culture there, which really, well, she said it broke her dreams of wanting to succeed in that environment. So empathy with you there, Jana. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
And Francesca has her hand up.
Thank you. Just really picking up on Ray was commenting on, and also the question of HR, human resources. Even the title, even that name feels like it's part of a dysfunction. It reflects a dysfunctional system. These aren't human resources. Does anyone honestly think that term is okay? This is John, this is Jenny, this is Martin who works here. These are people, whole people, with hearts and souls, not resources, which the corporates and the businesses and the powers that be at the top of the structures that Ray was referring to can use and position in ways that meet their intention. So it feels, I know I'm putting this quite strongly, but it feels as if there's a real paradox in here. It's like, okay, so HR is giving meditation classes to people who are going to relax. Actually, if you paid people and treated them more humanely and looked at it from a systemic point of view, you wouldn't be putting the responsibility on the individuals and getting brownie points and ticks for all these things that HR, this really dehumanizing acronym of a dehumanizing concept, comes from. So just wanting to put that in the room.
Thank you, Francesca. And by the way, I don't think you're putting it strongly. I can hear you, and I think many HR people are picking up on that. And at the same time, what I've seen is that sometimes they change the name, for example, to people and culture, but they don't change the ways of operating. And that's a real problem. So just expanding on that, because the problem you described is actually not about the name. The name is just the consequence that lingers from history, I think. So thank you.
Yes, and there's a lot of names that have changed as well. Language has changed in identity. The words that we can use to describe identities have changed and evolved a lot, and workplace identity as well. Feels like that's another territory that needs this holistic approach.
Yeah, thank you. I also see a comment from Abby, if I'm pronouncing that name correctly. My experience of HR has been that it holds itself out as an advocate for employees, but in fact is entirely loyal to management, which can feel like a betrayal. Yes, yeah. Yeah, hearing all that and reading all that almost feels like it justifies my discomfort at the beginning of this webinar, because I think this is not just about you, but this is really part of our collective experience. And actually, I have to admit to you that as I was preparing for this webinar, I was experiencing all kinds of weird things happening to me, because every time I tried to sit down and prepare for the webinar, things were popping up. And even in my free time, I realized that all of a sudden I had an urgent need to deep clean my kitchen, or reorganize my wardrobes, or even repot my plants, which I never do because I'm such a bad gardener. And so after a couple of days, I just had to sit down and I started asking, what's going on? What am I running away from? And at first I was thinking that actually I was procrastinating. But then I started to realize that my body was actually already working on the webinar, because it was delivering a message. Or actually, to be more precise, it was delivering a lot of questions. And these were questions like, are we really going to talk about that? You know, things that are not about the aspirational or inspirational parts of transformation, but that actually feel quite heavy. Do you even think people will feel safe enough to talk about these things in a more public space? And so all of a sudden I was full of doubt whether it's even a good idea to show up here, because I started to feel that the doubts that I had were maybe not just mine, that the resistance was not just mine, and that perhaps I was picking up on some undercurrents in our collective experience. And so the reason I'm saying it is that I thought that maybe it could be an interesting idea to just invite this resistance in the room and explore it and stay with it for a little longer, because also what I'm hearing you mention already starts to unfold some difficult experiences. And actually, resistance can sometimes feel like a barrier, right? And we're here to talk about barriers. But at the same time, maybe there's some deeper intelligence in it that we need to invite in and work with rather than fight. So what I'd like to do now, if you're okay with that, is to just for you to maybe explore the other side of the coin and maybe tune in into whether you can notice any kind of doubt, hesitation, or maybe a part of you that even would rather say no to being here today and exploring a topic like this, because I think there's a reason why this topic doesn't really make the agenda of corporate offsites or leadership summits. And I thought to just bring it in here so that we can explore together what this resistance might actually be about. So I'll give you a few moments to just sit with that and see if you can notice anything like this. And whatever comes up for you, maybe just for you. So there's absolutely no pressure to share anything. But equally, if something comes up, it may be more than just yours. And it could be very helpful if you share it with us and bring it in here, because it can help us understand what's really going on and what we need to work with a little more when we work with workplace toxicity. So take a few moments, and whenever you feel ready, if you want to share, just unmute yourselves or use the chat window again.
And we have one hand up already from Natalie, but we could pause another moment or so to give people a chance to feel into this. And then Natalie, you're very welcome to come in. Yeah, there's a message from Scott as well in the chat window. So I think, yeah, shall we pass over to, and please do correct me if I said your name incorrectly. Is it, it's Natalie, Natalia? Yeah, please do say.
Yeah, hi everyone. It's Natalie. To be honest, I wasn't supposed to be here tonight. I'm training at the Psychosynthesis Trust, and I was curious about the Alef Trust because I have made the choice to stop at the Psychosynthesis Trust anyway. I got your newsletter, I saw the title, and Dasa, sorry if I don't pronounce your name correctly. You just brought me back like 6 years from now, when I left a big international company. I had worked about 20 years in that company, and I had gone through all the roles like manager, logistics, and I finished in HR actually. And I would have never came to that webinar because I don't want to hear about work space again. I want to be a life coach, or yeah. And it's really weird because when you were talking about what's going on in your body or whatever, the emotions coming up, I felt like anger because I'm just witnessing the fact that that there's not many things that are changing. When I was in that company, there was a lot of communication about. I was in the what we call it the quality of life and work environment section. I don't know if you can call that like the unit in HR. We were specialized and we were working with doctors and psychologists to make things better in the company. But at the end of the day, and that's why I quit actually, to anyway do my own company. But because I realized that we can do whatever we want, and nothing was going to happen unless the egos of the people on the top of the pyramid are not going to change, and there's always a disruption between the top of the pyramid and the bottom of it. So you can place games, gamification in the workplace. You can do some weekends of brainstormings with plenty of brilliant things, but it's not going to change the systemic, how would I say this, functioning of the teams, and how do we take into account the richness of the people working in the company. It's like you were talking about human resources. In French, we were saying like human richness, richesse humaine, because that's what it is at the end of the day. So yeah, I just wanted to say that. Sorry for taking so much, but now I'm quite interested in the webinar. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. And yeah, I hear you, particularly when you started to talk about the anger. Some of what you said also made me wonder if there's a level of hopelessness even around, can even anything change? Isn't this entirely hopeless to even have a discussion about this? So I'm just reflecting what was happening to me when I heard you talk about your experience. Thank you.
And we have a hand up from Ray. Come on in, Ray.
Okay, I will try and make this as easy as possible to accept, but it might not be. So what I have witnessed working on many change programs is that the barrier to the sort of change we would like and the sort of relationships we would like is that often people in HR and leaders, they know a lot about people's skills, but they don't have any. So they cannot coach systemically, they cannot facilitate, they will offset this to other people. And what I make of that is that there's a fear that you get when you are placed in a certain position, and the way organizations are structured, that fear that holds you inside actually stops you from going on a learning journey that allows you to get those skills. And as a result, because you can't actually be that, you can't create those spaces. And what you default to, and what I've seen people in HR and leaders default to, is the classic position of organizations. We need to get things done. We've got a timetable. We've got to do that. I've got to do that. You've got to do that. This leader wants that. And actually what it's crying out for is those people themselves to go on their learning journey and be able to coach and be able to facilitate and create generative spaces. And they don't see that as valuable. What they see as valuable is getting their plans through. And I've worked on many large changes, and it's the same time and time again. So what if I want to hold that for both sides of this conundrum, for the side of leaders and HR people, it's a really difficult thing to embrace that you have those limitations, that you have to go on your own learning journey. And these people are never given the time to do so. And I don't know how they would be able in classic organizational structures to put their hand up and say, actually, I can't do this. I need to be able to get all those skills, and I don't have them. And leaders, well, we all know the fear that they hold. They can't do that either. I know, I've sat with them, I've coached them. That's what I want to say.
Thank you. It sounds like a real barrier again, and I'm picking up on similar things as before, that question, are these barriers even transformable? Is there even hope? Or is it something else that I should pick up on? Because I'm trying to understand what's the emotion also underneath what you're saying. Is there hope? Is there something else? Is there anger?
If I may.
think there's sorry, Jessica.
Yeah, sorry, I just weave something in then, Natalie, you can come back in. I was just reflecting on this from the academic sector. Alef Trust obviously is positioned in terms of university partnerships, and what I'm perceiving there is something very similar, because UK universities are now run like businesses. They're no longer educational institutions, well, they should be, but they're run as businesses. And there is a managerial class that is running, these universities as businesses. And what I'm picking up there, I don't know how aware everybody is of this, but the UK university sector is under immense financial pressures. Something like 75% of universities are projected not to meet their operating costs in the forthcoming academic year, 75%. So there is a lot happening behind the scenes at the moment in terms of restructuring, mergers, reduction of the numbers of faculties, and a lot of staff are being let go. What is that about? It's like we have lost the sense of what education is supposed to be about, what academia is supposed to be about, and we've fallen into a sort of hole in terms of these financial constraints that are now driving the entire organization, of a university, and imposing something top down. That's what it feels like. And it's very sad. If you ask me what in terms of emotion, I feel a sadness, I feel compassion for the people who are caught up in these larger systems that are driving themselves into the ground with these economic concerns and are not able to relate. There's a real division between the academics and the managerial class. And everybody's worn out and worn down. What I'm perceiving in the, of staff who are caught up in these systems, Alef Trust sits next to them, not connected, but not directly entangled. And I feel blessed about that. And I feel for my colleagues in the mainstream university sector who are going through this. So deep sadness, actually, for what's going on, and compassion, and then also some frustration, because this is just not how it should be. It's just upside down. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for naming that, because maybe it's the frustration that I feel the most within me, also in the room, and also scanning the chat window. There's something similar there. So in a way, I'm glad I invited the resistance in the room, because it starts to reveal what we're actually working with when we talk about and try and work with workplace toxicity, because it feels like it's a very charged topic. It's a very charged topic, and maybe that is one of the reasons why it's not really making agenda of all those leadership summits, because we kind of feel and suspect that things might get difficult when we open, because it feels like opening a Pandora's box, at least to me. And we're just opening it here right now. So I'm very grateful that you're sharing all these both opinions and also feelings, because I think they need to be worked with. And every time we start to see and notice these things, I think they slowly but surely they start to become workable. Not maybe solvable, but maybe if we start embracing that tension, maybe we can also start seeing some possibilities, because in that charge, I feel there is also a lot of movement. So it's not just negative, I feel, but there is some possibility in it as well. So with that said, yeah, and with a little bit, with a little more awareness about this, what I'd like to do now is maybe to share. I do have a couple of slides actually, so I'll just try to share them. There are not many, but just to visualize a couple of things. Can you see what I'm sharing? Okay, great, thank you. So I think once we start talking about toxicity, I think the instinct for many of us is to distance ourselves from it, because it's charged, and I think we feel it. And I think we consider it as something that's more about the difficult people out there, you know, the egomaniacs, the narcissists, the bullies. And of course, there's a lot of truth in that, a lot of truth in that. But equally, what I've come to see is that it's maybe not as simple, because at least that's what I'd like to suggest, is that these behaviors are actually symptoms of something systemic, something that doesn't only live in me or in other people, but in the space between us. And so what I'm talking about is that actually for a dysfunctional behavior to persist, something must enable it. Something must give it permission to exist. And that's where I think it gets a little more complex, because that's actually when we all start to have a role in it. So this is my attempt to just sketch a version of that toxic cycle. And so I think it often starts with the invisible design of the system. So what I mean by that are all the unwritten rules, all kinds of unspoken messages that in a way shape our behavior and reinforce our behavior. Because after a while, when these norms, and when I'm talking about norms, I'm talking about values, for example, that are lived, that in time turn into norms. And when these go unquestioned and unnoticed, they actually start to become embedded in the system, and they reinforce the dysfunctional behavior. And when I talk about dysfunctional behavior, I'm actually talking about things like power abuse. So some of the things even you described, things like, blaming, shaming, defending just the system. But then on the other hand, and that's, I think, the more difficult side of those dysfunctional behaviors. And I have to admit, I intimately know this side of dysfunction. It's what I call power misuse. And that's actually something that these are acts of disowning power. And what I mean by that, for example, in an HR role, is that it often becomes a kind of shock absorber, a role that constantly cleans up after toxic behaviors, making them disappear, trying to manage the company's image so that it stays intact. And I think you hinted some of those things also in your comments. Now, why do we do that? Having been in the role and having done a lot of reflection and a lot of shadow work, what I discovered was that actually on a level, we feel that our own security is tied to the stability of the system. And so we know that if we want to survive, we need to keep the system stable. And I don't think we do that intentionally or consciously. It's happening quite automatically. And we just simply start to constantly clean up, so that the system stays undisrupted. But then the next thing that happens is that we start to pay the price, because this comes with a price tag. Maybe it helps the system to survive in the short term, but in the long run, it doesn't work. So we start paying the price. Of course, not all of us, because those who engage in those abusive behaviors actually get energy for the next round of abuse. But many of those who actually tolerate and absorb get exhausted over time. And they start switching up. They start checking out, because they know that to stay engaged and open in a system that is dysfunctional and that is draining can actually cost them survival. So they start shutting down to protect their energy. But then here's the real twist. As we shut down to protect our energy, we at the same time know, I think, that we have to keep going. We have to keep getting our paychecks. We need to keep our reputation intact. And so again, unconsciously, we start doing exactly what the system wants us to do, because we know that the system rewards compliance with those unwritten rules and punishes acts of truth-telling and acts of even revealing the system. And so we start playing into the very system that we wish was so different, because we are afraid that if we didn't do that, we might as well not survive. And so that's how the loop keeps going. And the system shapes our behavior, and our behavior continues to shape the system unless we interrupt the pattern somewhere with awareness, with different choices, and start breaking the cycle there. And so what I want to say as well is that this cycle also produces a lot of toxic outcomes. And I think I don't need to convince you of those, because I guess many of you would have their own examples or experiences, and you've shared some of them. So these are just a few examples of what we're dealing with globally. Not all of them are global, but many of them are, which is also why I actually think that it's not a matter really of whether a company is burdened by toxicity, but how much. I genuinely believe that every single company is dealing with toxicity to a certain extent. But then what I also think is interesting is that when you look at Google Trends, you'll find out that something is really shifting, and it can look troubling at first, because when you look at searches for toxic work environment, the level of searches spiked massively over the last couple of years. And I'm sure this was partly catalyzed by the pandemic, because I think it gave us cultural permission to start talking about these things, but the interest is still there. So what I'd like to believe is that actually this is not that negative, because to me it feels like something is ripening in the collective field, and maybe something is getting ready for a shift, because we're starting to look for a language, or maybe for alternatives. So maybe that's not bad news, or at least maybe I'm too hopeful, but at least that's what I'd like to believe. And I hope it's not just my confirmation bias, that this is not just troubling, but also good news. So let me just pause you, or maybe one more thing that I'd like to mention. I don't know if you noticed that as well, but I've noticed that many companies start to realize that too, and they start to respond to this as well, because they see that their employees perhaps no longer have the same level of tolerance. And that they do start look for alternatives. So they start responding with all kinds of initiatives, from well-being initiatives, engagement initiatives, and all that. And I think that's all good. But at the same time, I feel like change does not really happen as expected. And again, I'm talking about my own experience, my own mistakes as well, because how we sometimes think about change is like this, that, we see a problem, then we define a vision that's supposed to be better, that responds to that problem, and then we look at the gap and try and close that gap with an action plan. And that might be good, because I think it's good to experiment with different things. But what I've noticed as well is that more often than not, those change programs don't really deliver. And one of the reasons, again, talking about my own learning journey, is that what's left out from those action plans are actually the deeper barriers that are at play. And so over time, I tried to reflect on what I've participated in and what didn't quite work. And I started to see some patterns, and I started to see that maybe those barriers are not as unpredictable as they seem. And so when I tried to map that, I asked my friend, who is a sketchnoter, to capture the essence of those barriers. And what came up as a metaphor is this. And so here I'd like to pause, actually, just to give you a few moments to have a look, because it's a busy picture. And just to see if any of this is something you recognize. Or perhaps you see completely different barriers when we try and lead change. So let me give you a few moments, and then I'll open the space to some reflections. Okay, so now I'll need a little bit of help from you, just to understand if more context is needed, because I don't know if it's self-explanatory, or if you prefer me to talk you through it a little more before we have a discussion about it. So if you'd like to give me an idea or your preference in the chat window, or just say it, it will really help me.
Dasha, can I just jump in? This is Avi.
Absolutely.
First of all, this is fascinating, and it is resonating for me at a lot of levels. The thing that I feel's not been said yet is, when I think of toxic organizations, I think of people who are driven by fear, rather than driven by curiosity, love, excitement, whatever else. And the fear is, both the cause and effect of the structures within the system. And it also feels analogous to family systems that are dysfunctional in the sense that there's earmarks, there's a lot of lying, there's a lot of blaming, people don't feel safe sharing their emotions, etc. But I guess my question to you is, have you seen places that are, if you will, love motivated or that function well? Or is my cynicism entirely justified?
Yeah. Is that a question for me? Would you like me to
Yes, please.
offer a perspective on that? Okay. Yeah. So, is it justified? As I said, I personally do think that all workplaces are burdened by toxicity. But that said, I also personally worked in a workplace or two that actually were functioning well. But that is not to say that there was zero toxic behavior. It was more a matter of, did the system actually have mechanisms to capture that behavior or those behaviors early enough and work and transform those behaviors? So I don't know if that if it's a good enough answer to your question, but that's just a brief one.
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay. Well, I see a couple of comments saying walk us through it, please. So let me just, I see Ray raise his hand. Would you like to unmute?
Yeah, I'll try not to take too long in saying this. What I noticed straight away were the words I and who am I, and then the it's not safe. And what I'd like to say is that it's a strange paradox that we exist in organizations and we talk about the way they are, and yet we are them. Mm. It's us who make those organizations up. And I think where the big challenge potentially lies, and I don't know whether I see it on this diagram or not. Maybe I do, in the fact that I make up that it's about being able to talk about things. But the big challenge is for all of us as individuals to realize that that's the actual basic mistake. That we are individuals with fear, and that actually, no, we are a system of people who will achieve nothing on our own. In fact, even the things we are dictated by our relationship to other things. Somebody once said relationship's probably the only thing that exists in reality, not ourselves. And so there's a paradox there. And I suppose Thomas Hubels talked about this, saying that organizations need systemic frameworks in which to actually reveal this to people. And Otto Scharmer talks constantly about these divides that we've created for ourselves and this moving from ego to eco-awareness. And he's talking about the fact that we've got to somehow rid ourselves of this notion that we're these individuals, whether we're frightened or we're not frightened, we're actually in relation to everything. And so that's what spoke to me in that diagram, was I couldn't find that anywhere.
Thank you. And I wonder if the reason you couldn't find it, I don't know, but I wonder now, as you said it, if it's because it's one of the biggest limitations of this picture, because it looks, I guess, more linear than it actually should be, because it does not really show that the different barriers constantly interact and amplify each other, and that even our own fears and what we visualize here as our own backpacks, and I'll talk through it in a moment, are not separate from the bridge, are not separate from the external barriers, because we're constantly shaped by the system. But then our backpacks, even if it means things like, will we negotiate with ourselves before we actually step on that bridge? Or will we hold back or will we step forward? That shapes how we show up, that shapes that bridge, and that shapes the system. So I don't know if it responds in any way to your concern, but I just thought to mention that I see that limitation in that bridge as well. Okay, should I then spend a couple of moments just walking you through that bridge, what I meant by those different barriers? So, okay, so on the left, you clearly see somebody who is maybe thinking about contributing to change, maybe a change maker, a leader, or even somebody who's just wondering if to do something, if to participate in change. But then we all have backpacks, and usually we don't really see what's in those backpacks because many of us focus on what's in front of us, on problems that are out there, rather than on what we carry. But then still we feel the weight. We feel the weight. And so what's in those backpacks are all kinds of things, like the exhaustion I was talking about earlier from constant survival mode, all kinds of biases we have, different mental habits, self-sabotaging patterns from, for instance, perfectionism, conflict avoidance, pressure to prove ourselves. But there are even deeper layers like perhaps shadow, personal shadow. So all those parts of ourselves that we tend to reject about ourselves and that we tend to see in others, criticize in others, or even get triggered by in others, but that we consider as not us. And all these things, particularly when we don't pay attention to them, of course, as I said, they shape and impact whether we even move forward or whether we would hold back. And then when we do step on the bridge, when we do start lead change, then we encounter all kinds of things. So from unresolved history. So I don't know what your experience is, but I think one of the most overlooked parts or barriers is actually unresolved history. So all kinds of past situations like layoffs, reorganizations, situations that actually could even create or perpetuate trauma that definitely created harm, but that have never been publicly acknowledged. But then what's not publicly acknowledged lingers. It can't be metabolized by the system. And what's not metabolized can't nourish. It's like with food, right? And so these things linger through stories told behind closed doors. And over time, they actually freeze into cultural norms. And those cultural norms can act like safety cones because they expose collective wisdom, actually, about what is and what isn't safe to do. So it's almost like when we step on that bridge, they tell us, pause, slow down and pay attention, because once you step out of the zone and you no longer play by these rules, you're no longer protected. You're no longer protected. And whatever you choose to do is at your own risk. So they try to discourage us because that collective wisdom knows what's going to happen to those who will speak up, for instance. Now, then you've got bureaucracy. So again, something that many of us know, I think. And originally, maybe it started with the good intentions. Things like order, structure, efficiency. So things that are not necessarily toxic. They are, particularly in bigger companies, they're even necessary. Otherwise, they can fall into chaos. But again, over time, the form hardened and started to become rigid and even dehumanizing, and started to stifle initiative and block change. Then you've got normalized fear-based leadership. So that type of leadership that is fueled by compliance rather than consciousness, and that is powered by fear. So for instance, it's normal that if we don't move fast enough, we can fall behind or even be replaced. Or it's normal that we should just constantly produce rather than pause or reimagine or make mistakes to learn. Because we know that if we do mistakes, we might as well be punished again. Then we've got role-based peer pressure. So here, what I mean by roles are both job roles. So what I've noticed is that normally we don't only have the official job descriptions, but also every role tends to be entangled in some kind of hidden agenda that is not spoken, but that we feel, which means that we are expected to do our best to protect the company's image. So for instance, we are supposed, if we're in an HR role or PR role, to do whatever we can to protect the company over the people in it, over employees. And that's what I think many of us feel. But then I think it's not just this, it's also roles that are more tied to our identity. So things like I identify myself with being a problem solver, or the team player, or the high achiever, or the change maker even. So these are also roles. And what they do is that they pressure us to stay in character. And that pressure can be, of course, it can be a pressure on us as individuals, but it can also pressure us to start policing over each other, so that we don't break that unspoken contract. So with a bit of a hyperbole, I could also say that this is a kind of corporate police that tries to catch what the earlier safety cones failed to manage. It's almost like the next line of defense so that the system can survive and keep itself from disruption. And then the last piece, double bias, I don't know if you're familiar with that term, probably some of you are. It's those situations when you can't win. It's whatever you do, you'll always lose something. You're damned if you do, damned if you don't. And I think a corporate classic would be that the company tells you, we need honest feedback from employees. But then that's the spoken message, because the company knows that they want to project that progressive image, but at the same time, they're not ready to live up to it. So the unspoken message is actually something like, but please tell us only what we're ready to hear. And honesty is not one of those things. And I think many people feel that. Many people feel the unspoken message again, because it's part of their collective wisdom. And so they go with the unspoken message rather than with the spoken one, because they know that if they followed the spoken one, the next day they would be labeled a troublemaker, or they'd be sidelined from projects, from salary reviews, from succession plans. And so that's why they choose to speak half-truths or simply not say anything. So these are just a few barriers that I've seen over and over. But what I want to say as well is that I don't think these barriers started as barriers, that actually they all started as responses to real needs. Needs like safety, protection, belonging. And these are not bad. These are not toxic. So what I'd like to suggest here is actually that maybe what we need to do as well is that we need to start thinking about what's the original intention, what's the original purpose behind those barriers, and try and see how we could upcycle them to a new, higher, healthier form. So that's the context I wanted to give you, and maybe let's pause here to see if you have any reflections, or again, if you feel something is missing or something is maybe misinterpreted. The floor is yours. And I see Wally raising his hand.
Hello, Dasa. Thank you so much for inviting and opening up a courageous conversation. I really appreciate it. And as I was looking at the image, first of all, I love the cartoon. There's a lyrical quality to it. And I was also, in my own role in the philanthropic foundation space, I've been very privileged to participate in well over 100 change initiatives, not just in one organization, but in multiple organizations. And as I was looking at this picture, I was looking for the coffee and donuts because I've never been to a change initiative that hasn't started with coffee and donuts. And my initial inclination was to think, oh, perhaps that's hidden in the backpack, where it says self-sabotage shadow. So more seriously, I wanted to, if I could, open up the conversation and build on all that's been said. So certainly here in the U.S., there are emerging corporate forms to address the very problems that you were discussing. Many of the dominant corporations, of course, are led and governed from a shareholder primacy standpoint, which means that all of the folks in the board of directors, for example, are legally liable if they don't put shareholder interests first. And so there has been now over the past 10, 15 years or so, even longer, a move in various parts of the US to introduce new corporate forms. So one is the public benefit corporation, another is a perpetual purpose trust. There are multiple other forms that put other stakeholders side by side with shareholders. And so that is one way to certainly reform and address the sort of barriers that you've pointed to that, again, are mainstream by virtue of the fact that the dominant corporations that employ the vast majority of people in the modern global economy, of course, are not governed that way. And needless to say, the governance, the corporate form itself is not sufficient because we all know that even within religious establishments, for example, many of these same maladaptive behaviors and dynamics can show up in lots of different ways. I did want to offer that at least as far as the changes that are blooming with respect to new types of corporate forms to address the issues that you're describing. I think one thing that can complement your approach is really the need for cross-sector mobilization. So the types of legal changes, market and financial changes that we're talking about, it's very unlikely to find that originate from within the existing dominant corporate sector that is governed in a very in the way that I described. And so what we're seeing is that the change is coming from all those allied stakeholders who both in the public sector and academia, various community groups, think tanks, so on and so forth, that recognize the very issues that you're talking about, and to some extent have been mobilized, incentivized, and also enabled to pursue the types of changes that you're talking about. So yes, of course, we need to, as individuals, we need to cultivate inner awareness. And it's also necessary to reform the institutional governance, financial, and market conditions out there. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Wally. Now I see Scott as well raising his hand.
Yeah, hi, Dasa. Hi, everyone. At risk of presenting an alternative view, my own perspective, having worked in large organizations for many years now, is that I don't see organizations being toxic. I see microcultures being toxic within organizations. Mm-hmm. And that microtoxicity is often fueled by personal grievances and conflict, which then can spread within that group until that conflict is resolved, or even the leadership style is resolved. That toxicity will just remain and fester. And so I think from my own personal experience, having experienced it firsthand, both at across organizations, as part of these groups which have become toxic, I think you need to address what is really going on at that individual level that triggers someone to start behaving in a toxic way. And that could be for all these multitude of reasons. And I guess we're going deep into, how to describe it, someone's psyche, or what motivates someone to behave in such a way that creates a toxic environment. So I don't think it's systemic from what I've seen, witnessed firsthand. I think it's individualistic. And I guess maybe just a final thought, and I'm just reading, I picked up a book actually as part of my studies, this idea of connectedness and dysregulated nervous systems, which then feed this individualistic, competitive job insecurity. And then that creates these behaviors within individuals, which then, as Ray alluded to, feeds this instinctual need to survive, which then feeds the toxicity, and trying to introduce more parasympathetic dominant states within organizations, which create more trust, more connection, more openness, more relational ways of being, which then, shall we say, reduce the tendency to fall back into a more primitive nervous system states, which then feed these behaviors.
Thank you, Scott. I do have to admit that maybe something wasn't quite right with my Wi-Fi, so you were breaking up a little bit, so I struggled to fully make sense of what you were saying. So I do apologize that I won't respond in a very meaningful way, but I'll try to watch the recording again to see what you said. So apologies. Maybe it's just me. Is there anybody else? I'm just trying to check the room or the chat window. Jessica, if you could help me in case you're ahead of me.
Sure thing. And also to say, Ray has put his hand back up. So we could weave in Ray and then come back to the chat.
Yeah, thank you. So I wanted to respond in a way to what Scott's just said, because I have witnessed very similar things. People being described as toxic individuals, micro cultures of toxicity, etc. So I acknowledge that, but at the same time, that for me points to the paradox, because those people are the system. Their toxicity comes out of the system, and whilst we all carry things with us, you know, as Daza said, we all carry things that we feel we have to do to keep us safe, to give us dignity, etc. And other people then see that as toxicity. The reality is you cannot resolve that on an individual basis. The only time I've ever seen this resolved is when people come together in a safe, generative environment, and they can give up this toxicity. They can give up some of the things that they found it impossible to express, and that's not an individual activity. It's a group activity. As I said in the chat, it's been described by other people as the power of being compassionately witnessed allows you to actually vent and move beyond your own behavior, which to you isn't toxic, but to other people is, because everybody's trying to survive, and they're seeing it differently. So yeah, I fully see what you're saying, Scott, but I also contend that it's not about the individual. It's about the tendencies of an individual being seen by the rest of the system as being toxic, and it's for the system to resolve it. An individual, I don't think, can.
Interesting.
Yes. Dasha, go ahead. And
No,
then
go ahead.
Yeah, I wanted to mirror back also that is exactly what's expressed in the chat window, and also Scott made the point around the parasympathetic nervous system activation and doing that organization wide, making that something that is a group, you know, Ray, a group-based activity, not the responsibility of the individual, but can we turn the culture towards creating spaces where we where we give permission to down-regulate together. So it's not just about self-regulation, but about co-regulation and making that available and having the compassionate witnessing. You know, you mentioned, I think, did you mention Thomas Hübel in this context? But essentially it comes back to working in a group-based fashion, taking the responsibility, not to say that individuals aren't responsible for themselves, but bringing some ease by saying, let's do this together, not alone. Yeah. Dasha, did you want to come back in? And then Rebecca has got her hand up as well.
It was just to endorse that I see some truth in both perspectives, because there's a paradox at play, isn't there? Because we need individuals to take courageous acts to speak up and perhaps initiate those spaces. But then it's those spaces that can create change. It's not individuals alone that can create those huge ripple effects. So I just wanted to, to say that we probably need to hold paradox and allow space for both.
Yeah, thank you. Rebecca, come on in.
Thank you. I feel fearful to be this voice in this system, because normally I'm part of a system that's speaking very business and strategy, and I'm the soft voice and the emotional voice. And right now what's wanting to come through me is that it feels really important to acknowledge that a company system, being a part of a company system, is a transaction. We're only included in it because we're as an employee, because we're opting into the contract of adding value to the company system in a particular way that the company system needs. And I feel that has a huge impact on the possibilities and the constraints around security and safety that exist in these spaces.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for being that voice, particularly if it's not what you commonly step into. Thank you for saying that. So do we have anyone else raising their hand or saying anything in the chat window?
We've touched into the tensions at play there, I think. And hearing Rebecca speak, it made me think that it comes back to the intention of an organization. What is an organization serving? And if an organization has a transactional orientation, which is, serving the interests of stakeholders, then maybe we will never get out of this tension because the whole system is set up to serve a particular subset of people. And the shift then is about reorienting organizations. Well, we're talking about reorienting an entire paradigm, really, right? Moving out of the capitalist system and towards something that is oriented towards other kinds of values. Maybe that is what it comes down to, and that's, the big picture view, but how that comes back down to individual organizations and then individuals and teams, it's a really big question.
Thank you, Jessica. And I see more comments popping up. It feels like it's a very rich space, and I'm even wondering what's the right thing to do now, because I'm also aware of the fact that time flies and that we have about 10 minutes left, if I'm not mistaken.
That's right, yes.
Yeah. So I feel like it's maybe the best idea that I just let go of the rest of the presentation that I had ready. After all, we can distribute it and you can have a look. There are just 2 slides, but what I'm wondering is about is, can we even see, with everything that you shared, can we even see a way that we can turn those barriers in stepping stones. Because even when I was talking about the bridge and you were sharing some other examples, I feel like there is always a deeper wisdom in any barrier that we experience. And one of the things I actually originally wanted to offer was another metaphor. It was a metaphor that comes from alchemy. You know, I originally come from the Czech Republic, and Prague has a deep connection to alchemy, and it has always fascinated me. And you probably know that in alchemy, the aim was never to just turn lead into gold, but that it was about, it was symbolic of transformation. So it's a way of thinking that I also like to use for inner and systemic change, because it helps us take the old form. It helps us look at what doesn't serve us and refine it into something more valuable. And so that's what I'm wondering about. If in everything that we're mentioning here, that we're sharing, if there is some deeper wisdom that is being offered to us, that we can work with and that we can then refine into a highest form. So maybe that's the only invitation I'd like to still share with you and see what comes out of that.
Thank you, Dasha. And just to mirror back as well, that in the chat window, Francesca also made a proposal around nature as a stakeholder. And you know, coming back to that point about detoxification, which is also a form of release and letting go. What is it that we can do to reduce the toxicity in the world, in our environment, in our physical body Earth? And could that have an impact back into our organizations? So there's something there about detoxifying on the grander scale, as it were, you know, zooming out from the individual or the organization even towards the planetary. Wally had his hand up. Wally, did you want to come back in?
Thank you very much, Jessica and Dasha. I just put it in the text. I said, I was so inspired. And what I put in the text, let's self-organize as a group, as the constituency of and for a brighter future.
Thank you, Wally.
It sounds like what just came up for me as you shared this, Wally, is that maybe all that frustration, and I sometimes even think about myself as a complainer, maybe the wisdom is that we need to indeed bring it into a larger group and do exactly that, so that we can start refining those complaints and that frustration into a movement for change. So thanks for suggesting that.
Yeah. And it may be Thomas Hübel style, collective trauma healing, as it were, but for organizations. Yeah. Which connects back to alchemy and the, you know, tending to the dark material that needs to be transformed and surfaced and in some way shifted. Edgar, Ray.
I'm thinking if you want some sort of alchemy, I'm thinking that there is indeed an alchemy there around moving away from a left-brained individual results-oriented approach to a right brain overall context relational approach. And as a final thing I'll offer you, then we don't need to change HR, because we just change the initials from human resources to human relating.
Yeah.
Love that, Ray.
Thank you. Anyone else? Is there any wisdom? Is there any deeper intelligence you see emerging?
Terry has his hand up.
Oh.
Come in, Terry.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for a wonderful session, Darsha. Yeah. And I wonder if the deeper wisdom is within the younger generations. And the reason why is I think, Wally was talking about shareholder capitalism. And I think the shareholders believe that they own the assets that produce the profit within organisations. And they employ managers to act as their agents to maintain and manage those assets. But unfortunately, I think in the past, shareholders believe that the assets that they own include people, that shareholders own people within organisations. And we've seen this go wrong many times when there's acquisitions where one company buys another one for a certain amount of value, and then the value walks out of the door, and they've lost a lot of value from the acquisition. And when I think about my career, when I was working in a corporation, I certainly did feel that the company owned me in many ways, and that created a lot of these dysfunctions that I had to put up with all this toxicity, because it owned me because I was a wage slave, because I had a big mortgage to pay, keep a roof over my head. So I had to keep my job. And therefore, yeah, perhaps the company and the shareholders did own me in many ways. I became a slave that they owned. But I wonder if that's the case for the younger generations now. Because you quite often hear the younger generations working in an organisation for 2 or 3 years and then go travelling for a year, work for 2 or 3 years. Are the younger generations not taking out big mortgages? Is that a thing of the past? Or is there more flexibility in the workplace that you don't have to work for a company for 20 years to have that job security? So I wonder if the younger generations are going to bring the wisdom to actually say to the shareholders, look, you don't own me. I'm not your asset. And I'm not going to put up with this toxicity. So I've kind of got hope in the future, really. The future is with the young. Thank you.
Thank you, Terry. And listening to you, what I'm picking up on are some signals that maybe what we need, what's calling for our attention, is a cross-generational and cross-sector. I think that's how Wally called it, cross-sector dialogue. That maybe we need to stop focusing on organizations purely or generations that dominate organizations and start widening the space and start widening the space that in such a way that it brings more voices in and that brings more voices from the margins to the mainstream, and hear those voices and see how they can enrich us.
Yeah. So many layers here to the discussion that I feel are dancing between us in the room. One thing I feel when I was looking at your slides earlier, there was this chart as well, which showed that in recent times, more and more people are voicing this and becoming aware of toxicity. And I wondered on the timeline whether COVID played a role there as well, because people were in some way distanced from workplaces, right? We're not able to go into work, but stayed at home. And that disruption enabled a lot of people to reorient themselves. So it feels like there's something here in terms of bigger shifts that want to happen, and organizations needing to create a different atmosphere in the workplace, bringing in I've said it before, the co-regulation aspect, also maybe reorienting towards nature and really looking, well, again, it has been said, looking at the wider aspects of what is going on here, and then the individual journey where we're each at. I didn't quite pull that together because I'm just processing multiple layers that are dancing in the room. And I'm very curious where this might lead us here in the Transforming Organizations Hub. because this is in its own right an experimental space. We have opened the conversation and to look at difficult topics, to look at conversations that are not happening enough, and to adopt also the transpersonal view. So to look through wider lenses, bringing in multiple intelligences and that sense of we are embedded in something larger and greater than ourselves as individuals and as organizations. Now I can see that Scott has his hand up, and I know we're at the top of the hour, but Scott, shall we welcome you in, and then we'll fold the conversation with Dasha. You're muted right now, Scott.
I think you raised a really interesting point, and I also observed the increase in perceived toxicity seems to be from around the pandemic and onwards. Having, currently work in a large financial organization, it's very topical right now, the topic of flexible working. And you may have seen that there's this now push for organizations to for people to come back more, spend more time in the office. So initially it was 2 days, 3 days, 4 days, and even some organizations are saying, you have to be in 5 days a week or full time. And that's causing a lot of distrust, a lot of sense of anguish, a lot of sense of disconnection, because employees quite rightly value their flexibility, their time spent at home with family and friends, yet management is saying, no, we need to see you spending more time in the office. So it's that disconnection between management and employees that's feeding this toxicity, I think, as a potential contributor. So changing their workspace and the way we interact is really feeding this, I think.
Yeah, and thank you, Scott. And Jana is adding in the chat window, perhaps when individuals can organize their lives so that they can't be owned, the organizations would compete for more healthier workplaces. Yeah, that's a really interesting point. Oh, it feels like we've opened an inquiry up, but it doesn't feel complete, and that is perfectly fine. Perhaps this conversation is to be continued. Dasha, would you like to say any closing words to round things off for us today?
Well, yeah, thank you very much. And I have to admit that I'm processing a lot of what has been mentioned. I made many notes because I feel very enriched by what you shared. So thank you for that. And I literally feel like we've only touched the tip of an iceberg, and it feels very rich, and it almost feels overwhelming to me. I don't know how it feels for you, but to me, again, it's not necessarily negative. It's also a sign that something wants to come through and something wants to move. And yes, we're not here to solve it, I feel, but maybe we were here to open it. So I do hope that we at least open something, and yeah, to be continued. I don't know how, I don't know when, but I hope we can continue the dialogue. So thank you, everyone. I really appreciate all your inputs and sharing. Thank you.
Thank you, Dasha. And what came to my mind there just now is a term that is used in transpersonal psychology and specifically transpersonal research methods. Rosemary Anderson coined the term. She calls a particular stage in the transpersonal research process auspicious bewilderment. It is when we have opened something up and we have immersed in it and we are living it, and we cannot see the woods for the trees. There are so many signals coming through and so much information, and it is not yet making sense. And it does feel like we're in that stage of auspicious bewilderment. And maybe there is something here about trusting and following through what wants to happen next. I'm speaking for, in terms of the larger systems, but also here in the Transforming Organizations Hub. We're feeling our way forward with the conversation to see what wants to happen next between us in this space. Thank you again, Dasha, for being with us today. And just to give you a heads up, we've got our next session on the 3rd of June. And it is actually to explore, and I quote, this is the title, Organizations as Living Systems at the Edge of Chaos. This does feel like an appropriate next session. And it is with Robin de Carteret, who is an educator and a facilitator and consultant in complexity science. We will be playing in this session. Robin uses a lot of playful activities in order to explore how organizations could shift through complexity science and biomimicry and systems thinking. So I think this will be a really lovely next step, continuing the conversation and doing so in a playful way, allowing other ways of sense making to come to the fore as well. Thank you all for being here with us today, and thanks again, Dasha, and I hope your book really finds its way out into the world, and huge thanks to all of you for being here, and we carry on in a month's time. Look after yourselves, everyone. All the best, and bye for now. Feel free to unmute to say goodbye.
Thank you. Thank you,
Yes.
everyone.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Thanks.